Welcome to Southern Maryland Perspectives. My name is Brad Godfrey, and I'm the president of the College of Southern Maryland. This is a talk show that features timely topics and guests from around the region. With me today is Bill Grimmette, who is a Chautauqua performer. And actually, I should tell the listeners that for many, many years, the college has hosted a series of Chautauqua events where we bring in actors, actresses who portray historical figures, sports figures, people that everybody knows about but really don't know, quite frankly. And Bill is going to be on, I want to make sure I have this, on Wednesday, July the 12th. Now, it's a little way in the future, but I'm hoping you'll grab a calendar and plug it in. But Wednesday, July the 12th starts at 6:45 p.m. It's going to be at the La Plata campus. If you know where the Fine Arts Center, it's right on the lawn. And what's nice about it is it starts off with music, and then we get into Bill, and he'll be talking about Chautauqua specifically. He is going to be talking about and portraying W.E.B. Dubois. So, long introduction. Bill, good morning. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Brad. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Now, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, great, thanks. So, Bill, now where do you live?
I'm here in Maryland.
Okay.
I'm in Gambrills, which is not far from the college, actually.
Oh, wonderful. So you don't
Yeah.
you can sleep in your own bed when you do Chautauqua.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I always start with the same question, Bill, and it's could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am an Alabama boy by birth. I was born in Alabama, Sylacauga, Alabama, which is about 40 miles south of Birmingham,
Okay.
and graduated from high school back a long time ago. Back in 1962, and headed straight for the Army. I spent 20 years in the Army, actually.
Oh, okay.
And got my college education in the Army, both undergrad and graduate degree in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then went to George Mason in 1985 and did some postgraduate work, but did not finish the degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 1968, I got my commission, stationed in Indianapolis, and was doing some acting.
Right.
And I got really fascinated by acting, so I went to an acting conservatory right there in Indianapolis,
Mm-hmm.
and finished that in '72, and started acting at the same time. Just so happened that the only casting agent in the city of Indianapolis at the time was a student in my acting class.
Oh.
So she began to send me around on professional acting
Wow.
jobs before I even knew how to act.
Wow.
So,
And you
so it
probably
was
look
great.
back on it and say, "Holy cow, I was actually on stage."
Exactly, yeah. I was on stage, in film, doing commercials and all kinds of things.
Wow.
Because every job she had, she sent me on.
Okay.
So it was wonderful. So I've been doing that now for some 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, did you act in when you were in high school?
I did my high school, my senior play, and actually, I didn't remember this for a long time, but almost in every year they had a play of some kind, and I was always in the drama club.
Okay.
But I didn't realize that acting was such a part of my psyche, my
Yes.
blood,
Yes.
until I was sitting in my quarters one day in Indianapolis, looking out at the snow falling, and a bird came in and sat on the newspaper that was in the yard. I had not gathered it.
Mm-hmm.
So after you did it 3 times, I went and got the paper and opened it up, and there was an ad for an acting conservatory.
Oh.
And it turns out that was the only thing I read in the paper that day.
Ah. Now, were you able to act while you were still on active duty?
I was,
Okay.
because I was in actually personnel administration. And when I was in Indianapolis, I was teaching at the Institute of Administration.
Okay.
And so my classes were from 7 in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do some acting jobs after that.
I see.
And I stayed there for quite a long time. And then when I came to Washington, D.C., I was working in the Pentagon.
Okay.
And same thing. I had, hours that were really wonderful. So it allowed me to do some acting as well.
I see. Wow. And then after you left the military, you just stayed in
I
Southern
just
Maryland?
walked
Or
right
Maryland?
into acting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now, do you have a role that you have played that you felt this was me, and I felt that you felt really good in this particular role.
That's an interesting question. I just finished doing King Lear,
Hmm.
but at here in Washington D.C. just last month,
Okay.
which was I did not think was my role, but I succeeded in it very well.
Uh huh.
And I did also driving Miss Daisy down in Fredericksburg
Ah.
in the end of last year.
Uh huh.
And so I don't know that I have a role that I can claim because back in the day when I started, there were scant plays that black actors could do.
Hmm.
And there were some. You had your Raisin in the Sun, which I actually never did.
Oh, okay.
Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, plays like that, and I did quite a few of those.
Hmm.
But in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, most of the plays were race-based plays.
Okay.
They were talking to the conditions that were in the country.
Hmm.
But nowadays, since August Wilson and there are an awful lot of fine writers, the roles have become meatier.
Hmm.
And I actually walked away from theater back in the late 80s, early 90s, and decided to become a storyteller.
Oh, wow.
Pardon me?
That's amazing. Do you still
I
do that?
still do that.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I only
That's
do
a
theater
talent.
now when somebody calls me and says, "Look, I got this role that you want to do," and I get a
Okay.
chance to look at it and decide. But for the most part, I do storytelling now,
Oh,
and
interesting.
I do that in schools and all the way up to corporate level.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's neat as well. Have you ever had a role that you've played where you just hated it? You said, "I'll never do it again."
Probably King Lear, but no, I didn't hate it. It was just such a challenge, as a physical challenge. But no,
Okay.
I don't think that I have done that for a role. But the reason I walked away from theater is because I really was not satisfied. For some reason, I was wonderful while I was on stage,
Yes.
but the life around the theater was not quite for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I really have never put my finger on what that was.
Okay.
But no, I've never done that in terms of just gave up on roles.
Sure. Now, when you're a storyteller, when you go to the schools or corporate offices, are there certain stories you tell? Does it relate to the audience? How do you determine that?
Yes, I for most of the stories that I tell, I write myself
Ah.
because my whole reason for telling stories in 1988, I bought an RV and I was traveling around the country
Mm-hmm.
looking for myself.
Okay.
And that's when I discovered storytelling. But how I did it was I was sitting in my aunt's house. She was telling me a story about my grandfather,
Right.
whom I had not known, but she told me about his side of the family, and I was mesmerized to find out that my family could be traced even then back to 1823.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me that 1823 was only about 35 years or so after the nation was born.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is rich.
Yes.
So I did put together some stories and told them at the family reunion and watched how all of the family's eyes were just like silver dollars.
Yes.
They were just mesmerized.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is what I need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began telling stories. So I began to put together stories
Okay.
so that people could be empowered by the stories that I told.
Wow. I'd love to hear some of your stories in the future. Now, do you have a website that you maintain?
I took it down. I'm revitalizing it right now,
Okay.
even as we speak. It'll probably be up before the summer is over.
Okay. I mean, does it have an address that people can visit?
Not
I mean,
right now.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll
But
definitely.
I'll get that to you by the time I come down.
Yeah, and I'm sure people in the future can Google you and visit the site.
Exactly.
But let's talk about Chautauqua. Let's talk about July 12th, and let's talk about Dr. Dubois.
Yes.
Now, before we go much further, have you done a Chautauqua before as part of the? This is the Maryland Humanities Council,
Yes.
Have you done any of the Chautauquas before?
I did. I have. I did W.E.B. Du Bois from Maryland.
Uh-huh.
I did Frederick Douglass,
Oh,
Martin
okay.
Luther King. So I've done several different characters, and Benjamin Banneker as well.
Now, how do you feel about, you know, it sounds like you gravitated away from theater. This is kind of a combination, sort of in between, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's why I love it so much. Because it's storytelling,
Yes.
but you
Yes.
have to actually do the scholarly work. You have to go and do the research, as an actor would do,
Right.
and make sure you know what you're talking about. And some of it really needs to be scripted, but not all of it. So that because the audience gets to the way the Chautauqua works, as you know, you got to get up and do a monologue for
Right.
about 30 to 40 minutes. And telling about the character and making sure that the audience understands who this well-rounded person is. And then, after you finish, the audience gets to ask you questions in character
Yes.
for 15 to 20 minutes.
Right.
No, for 10 to 15 minutes.
Uh-huh.
Now, they get to ask you whatever they want.
Right. And you're in character.
You're in character. You have to respond the way the character would respond.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And so I remember doing Martin Luther King at over in the Eastern Shore.
Uh-huh.
I think it was at the Eastern Shore. And at any rate, a woman was sitting on the front row, and when I finished, she said, "Do you remember when my friend and I came to visit you?" And she went on and on about where they met me, and tears were in her eyes.
Oh.
And now I'm stunned. I don't know what to say, but she's still talking. So I let her talk. And when she finished, the audience was just on pins and needles, waiting to hear what I was going to say. And I looked at her and I said, "Was that you?"
That must
I
have
said,
been.
"Come up here and give me a hug."
Wow.
And they just fell out. But, so you have those moments where you're skunked.
I would think
you have no
so.
idea what to
Oh,
say,
boy.
but you got to respond.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I understand, I've been to several of these, obviously. And then you go out of character and then answering questions in
Yes.
terms of playing the character and what that's like.
Exactly. You can take questions there because
Yes.
people want to know, how did you put this together? Because if you've done it well enough, then the questions actually pertain to, did you sound so, like you were actually Du Bois?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so then they want to know, but if you didn't, they want to know, when you're going to go back and try this again.
Yes, definitely. Wow.
But it's a wonderful experience, and it's a wonderful experience for the audience. It's free,
Right.
and people can bring their lawn chairs and come out to this big tent. Usually, it's on the outside.
Yep, you got it.
And they can just kick back and enjoy the music at first, and then enjoy several characters that are performing. I think this year we have General John Pershing.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And we also have President Woodrow Wilson.
That's right.
And then W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes, and thank you for that, Bill, because I should have mentioned it. It is free. Bring a lounge chair. It is outside, and if you don't have a lounge chair, don't worry. We've got plenty of chairs that we will rent to you cheap. I'm kidding. They're free as well. And it's under a tent, and it's just a delightful evening. The weather usually cooperates, but we do have a tent. And thank you, Bill, also. It really starts on Tuesday, July the 11th, and that's General John Pershing. And then, and that's also 6:45. Bill will be available on the 11th or the 12th, Wednesday, to do Dr. Du Bois. And then on Thursday, July 13th, we will have the esteemed President Woodrow Wilson. We haven't had too many presidents on our campus. Now, Bill, in terms of the number of performances, so you go all around the state as part of the Chautauqua, right?
Yes, we go to Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore. We do one in Montgomery County, one in Prince George's County, and then one in Southern Maryland.
Yes, and that's why I'm really excited because to have the high quality program coming to the college, coming to Southern Maryland, really means a lot to us, and I just get excited. Well, actually, I'm going to be retiring, So maybe I'll be able to get to all three. Usually I'm able to get to one or two each season, but
Hmm.
generally not all three.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about. Well, first of all, before I go on, we're about halfway through, so I want to make sure that everyone understands I'm with Bill Grimmette, who is an esteemed actor who lives in Maryland and who will be on campus on Wednesday, July 12th at 6:45 to represent and to portray W.E.B. Du Bois
Hmm.
and as part of the Chautauqua series. So he will come out in full regalia. He will look and act and sound like this very esteemed civil rights leader, and I mean, and we're going to talk about what a mind this man had, a
Yes.
brilliant, brilliant mind.
Hmm.
It's free. It's outside. It's at the La Plata campus. It's outside of the Fine Arts Center, and it's just a wonderful way to spend an evening, a summer
It is.
evening.
It really is.
So tell me though, when you've got a whole life, usually the actors will pick a certain section of it or look back on their lives. How are you approaching Dr. Du Bois?
Well, this life, you have to pick a certain part
Okay.
because he was born in 1868, the year that Andrew Johnson was impeached.
Hmm.
The 3 years after Abraham Lincoln was killed.
Okay. Yes.
So the frame of his life begins right at the beginning of Reconstruction,
Mm-hmm.
and then he grows up in Massachusetts, Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and he comes down and goes to Fisk, and then graduates from Harvard. He's the first black man to get a PhD
Mm-hmm.
from Harvard. He goes to Berlin and he studies in Germany. He studies, gets all of the credits for a PhD in economics,
Mm.
but he does not get the degree.
Oh.
Um,
Okay.
and so he comes back to Harvard and finishes a degree in sociology. So he was studying history, sociology, and economics. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what we're covering is the period from about 1900 to 1920. The theme this year is the Great War, and it's about World War I,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we've got Pershing and Wilson and Du Bois.
Okay.
So the question we're trying to answer is, what was Du Bois doing
Mm.
in this Great War? Now, it is a fascinating period for America in particular because it's the turn of the century. The 1914 is when the war actually begins, and America doesn't get in there until 1917, and segregation is rampant across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Du Bois is not really a warrior. He's not a pacifist, but he doesn't really subscribe to war.
Mm-hmm.
But he's trying to figure out, and his whole life has been trying to figure out how to get African Americans blended into the mainstream of American society.
Okay.
And so, but he was going to do it from a scholarly standpoint. He was basically a sociologist. He had written the Souls of Black Folks, in which he had captured an awful lot of the issues that were offending the nation. He had done the Philadelphia study, where he had studied blacks all around in Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd done one of the first sociological studies of with using statistics and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very bright, and he
Yes.
was also working with Booker T. Washington, or trying to work with Booker T. Washington, but he had a falling out with him in 1895 after the speech that Booker T. Washington gave about accommodations.
Yes.
And so he fell into a place in the early part of the century, the 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
in which he was the leader, because Booker T. Washington died in 1915.
Okay.
Frederick Douglass had died in 1895. And so Du Bois was sort of there,
Mm.
but he was not a charismatic leader. His leadership was more literary and scholastically,
Okay.
scholarship.
Yes.
And so I think he recognized that. But and so his job in World War I was to try to get blacks to understand why they needed to fight in the war.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wrote in the Crisis magazine. He was one of the founders of the NAACP.
Yes.
Because he founded the Niagara movement in about 1906 or thereabouts, and they called it the Niagara movement because the only place they could meet was in Niagara Falls in Canada, because they couldn't stay at a hotel in New York.
Okay.
And then they brought it down to Harper's Ferry, which is for the second meeting. And then they blended in 1909. They blended the Niagara movement with the NAACP, and it became the NAACP. And he was working with some of the descendants of some of the abolitionists. William Lloyd Garrison's one of his relatives, Oswald Villard. Mary White Ovington, and an awful lot of the people. So it was a mixture of people. And so Du Bois was working with the NAACP, writing in the Crisis, and he wrote in the Crisis this whole thing called Close Ranks.
Okay.
Close Ranks, where he said, it's time for us now to volunteer to fight in this war. Because the war was, as Wilson said, the war to end all wars and all of that.
Well, let me ask you, Bill, now, was there resistance that he had overcome, or was it just to stir people up so they wanted to enlist?
Both.
Okay.
First of all, he too, they were not interested in wars. So, but there was not a war, that they had fought. I think since I believe in 1898.
Yeah, the Spanish-American War.
You're right. So he was, there was not an issue because blacks couldn't even join the military. And it was, segregation was so absolutely vile and rampant that if they knew that if they were going to be brought into the army, they were going to be brought in as laborers.
Yes.
And so he was trying to make the point that, look, let's just get in first.
Okay.
And do our part. And once we get in, we'll make the case for all the other things, which is exactly what he did. He made the case for officer candidate training school. He made the case for black officers to lead black troops, even for blacks to fight in combat, because sure enough, of 200,000 people in the military, they had 150,000 of them as labor, digging ditches and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So in order to fight, the black units had to actually join the French. So they actually, the fighting forces in the World War I fought with the French, because the French would put them in combat.
And that's where they wanted to be, obviously.
They wanted to be in combat because what they were fighting for was respect. And Du Bois that was the case he was making. That if you're going to get respect, you're going to have to go to the front lines and show them that you deserve it. Yes. Now, an awful lot of people in the country were against that. Even the people in the NAACP.
Oh.
And Mary White Ovington and those guys were pacifists. They didn't want war at all.
Okay.
So he was fighting against the people with whom he was working too. And then he fought against Woodrow Wilson. He called out Woodrow Wilson about his segregation policies in the Army and all of that, and had voted for Woodrow Wilson, had even campaigned for Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Because he was trying to make a decision. The beauty of this part of the country is that there was a Republican Party, which was the party of Abraham Lincoln, and there was the Democratic Party. But they were kind of flipped.
Yes.
Except in 1876, the Republican Party started going towards more towards the South because of the Tilden. What was his name? Rutherford B. Hayes.
Okay.
And Rutherford B. Hayes won in the Congress by getting the Southern people to go with him, and and pulled the federal troops out of the South, and which started this drift of the Republican Party towards the South. And it didn't really culminate until about 1928, but between that 1876 and 1900, and therefore that area, blacks were trying to figure out which party was going to best serve their needs.
Right.
And Du Bois was having that praying problem. Most of them couldn't vote anyway.
I see.
Especially in the South.
Yeah.
And so those were the kinds of issues that were going on, and this was a very tense period. And Brad, during this period, just prior to the war starting, there were race riots all over the country.
Okay.
Whites were attacking blacks, tearing down in Oklahoma, and all over the place. So it got so bad that a group of black soldiers had to march on Houston, Texas, in the infantry with their guns, just to stop people from rioting against their communities.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
So it was a deadly time.
Uh-huh.
You know, so he had an uphill climb.
Yes. Now, what year did he actually pass away?
1963. That was another fascinating event. He was 95 years old. He had gone to Ghana. He had gone to Ghana in 1961.
Okay.
And the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave the "I Have a Dream" speech, was August 28th.
Okay.
The night before, on August 27th, Dubois died. Randolph, A. Philip Randolph, came on stage and whispered to Martin Luther King that the old man is gone. So he passed the baton at exactly the perfect time.
Oh, see, I didn't realize that. So you had the advantage of being able to see and hear. I don't know if now you're older. You mentioned that you were graduating from high school about the time that he was passing. So do you have recollections, or did you look at tapes of him so you got his mannerisms and the way he spoke and dressed?
Yes, I looked at some tapes, and I don't really try to do. I don't try to do his character.
Okay.
I want his words to ring.
Yes.
And so I dress up in the period, but of course his period was almost 100 years. So in any period that I choose, I can use. But more than that, I'm trying to make sure that people hear his words and go and read what he wrote, because I'm telling you, he was a wonderful writer. He wrote the Black Reconstruction, talking about what was really going on in that period from the time he was born at the end of the Civil War up through up to actually the turn of the century. I think he covered it from 1860 to 1880.
Okay, wow.
And it's a really wonderful tome about what was really going on and why Rutherford B. Hayes and all of those guys were making choices that they were making and that sort of thing.
Now, did the civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King, was Du Bois an inspiration to him? Was he a peripheral figure by that time?
No, he was never a peripheral figure. What he did was, before he left going to Ghana, and he did that because Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, was his student.
Okay.
At one time, and then had invited him to come and live out his days there.
I see.
And to write the Black Encyclopedia.
Huh.
And that's what he went to do. But as he left the country, he had been called up before the House Un-American Activities Committee and all of those kinds of things, and they threatened to put him in jail, taking his passport, because he had signed up with the Socialist Party back in his early days, and he found out that was not the answer. And so he was looking, but they kept calling him a communist. So in 1961, before he left, he joined the Communist Party.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the civil rights leaders at the time, because communism was such a bugaboo, they could not touch him, could not embrace him very tightly, because they were all J. Edgar Hoover was already trying to brand them communists.
Right.
And so they could not use much of him, but they knew of him and they had read his stuff, and they respected him, but they couldn't embrace him. So you had that kind of separation going on.
Well, Bill, I wish we had more time.
No.
Believe it or not, this is 30 minutes have transpired. This has been a delightful conversation. I'm really looking forward to meeting you. But to the listeners, I encourage you to come meet Bill Grimmette, who is going to be portraying W.E.B. Du Bois, a great civil rights leader. It is at the La Plata campus on the lawn of the Fine Arts Center. It is free. It is Wednesday, July 12th. Starts at 6:45 with music, and then Bill will come out and portray Dr. Du Bois. Lots of opportunity to engage in who this man was and his contributions just a wonderful evening. So I
Yeah.
encourage all of you. And Bill, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thanks to the Maryland Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the
Yes,
Humanities for sponsoring these kinds of programs.
definitely. Really enriching, and hopefully they continue.
I hope so.
Yes. And I also want to thank the listeners for tuning in, and I hope you'll join me next week for another edition of Southern Maryland Perspectives. Until that time, I'm Brad Gottfried, president of the College of Southern Maryland.